Welcome to Life Stories, where we share tales of resilience, courage, and the extraordinary power of the human spirit. Today, we bring you a gripping story about a small town, Summit Grove, and its fight against unimaginable odds. What begins as a quiet community threatened by a notorious gang and shadowy forces soon transforms into a battle for survival and a lesson in unity and hope. Prepare to be inspired as we dive into a tale of love, sacrifice, and the strength that comes from standing together. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories and join us as we begin today's story. I never imagined how much one quiet afternoon could change everything. It was an ordinary Sunday at Summit Grove Park. The kind of day that reminds you why small-town life has its charm. The sun filtered through the trees, and the crisp autumn air carried the sounds of children laughing and leaves rustling in the breeze. I sat on a wooden bench, grading papers with a red pen, my eyes darting every so often to my kids, Emma and Jake, who were playing on the swings. They were 8 and 6. A handful. But my heart. Summit Grove had been home for the past 3 years. Ever since I decided we needed a fresh start. It wasn't just about finding a quieter place to raise my kids, it was about rediscovering a version of myself that felt buried under the rubble of a failed marriage and too many compromises. Sundays in the park had become our ritual. A chance to reset before the week began. I never thought that day would be anything but ordinary. The first sound was subtle, a distant rumble. I didn't think much of it at first. But as it grew louder, the peaceful atmosphere shifted. Parents began glancing toward the park entrance. Conversations faltering. The rumble turned into a roar as the iron fangs rolled in. Their motorcycles gleaming in the sun. Their leather jackets emblazoned with a jagged fang insignia. The leader, Derek Stone, stood out immediately. His presence filled the park. Not just because of his stature but because of the way he moved, calculated and predatory. Like he knew exactly how to unsettle everyone around him. Behind him was Logan Reaper Hayes, his right-hand man, whose sharp eyes scanned the park as if cataloging vulnerabilities. The rest of the gang fanned out, cutting off the exits. Parents scrambled to gather their children. My heart raced as I watched Emma and Jake on the swings. Oblivious to the danger, I called to them as calmly as I could, trying not to betray the fear tightening in my chest. Emma, Jake, it's time to go, I said, my voice steady but firm. They ran to me, confused but obedient. As I packed my things, Derek Stone's gaze locked onto mine. Well, he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. What do we have here? A teacher from Summit Grove Middle School. Isn't that right? My breath caught. But I didn't falter. I stood tall, placing myself between him and my children. We were just leaving, I replied, my voice firm. Stone smiled. But it wasn't warm. Now that's not very neighborly. We came to have a little community discussion about protection. Logan circled behind us, his movements slow and deliberate. I could feel Emma clutching my hand tighter, Jake hiding behind my leg. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. The park doesn't need protection, I said, meeting Derek's gaze. Neither does Summit Grove. Oh, but it does. Logan cut in, his voice low and menacing. You've seen the vandalism, the theft. Accidents happen when people don't have the right kind of protection. They weren't just threatening me, they were threatening Emma and Jake. I could see it in the way Logan's eyes flicked to them. Anger surged through me, but I knew better than to let it show. My brother Ethan's voice echoed in my mind, keep them talking. Buy time. What kind of protection are you offering? I asked, my voice even. Stone's grin widened. For you. Let's call it $2,000 a month. Educational discount. I let out a shaky breath, pretending to consider. My fingers slipped into my purse. Finding the phone I'd kept hidden there, I pressed the emergency sequence Ethan had drilled into me years ago, praying he was somewhere he could respond. I'll need time to think about it, I said. stalling. You've got until Friday. Stone replied, stepping closer. The smell of leather and cigarette smoke was suffocating. And don't even think about talking to the cops. That'd be a mistake. With that, he gestured to his crew. And they began to back away. But not before Stone turned and added, this was just a friendly visit. Next time won't be so pleasant. I stood there, frozen, as their motorcycles roared to life and they disappeared down the road. It wasn't until they were gone that I realized I'd been holding my breath. I knelt to hug Emma and Jake, murmuring reassurances I wasn't sure I believed. My hands trembled as I texted Ethan. They're gone. The kids are safe. For now. I didn't know how he'd respond. Ethan's life was a world away, full of classified missions and dangers I couldn't begin to understand. But I knew one thing for certain, Ethan wouldn't let this go unanswered. 3 hours later, as my kids slept in their beds, I paced the living room, unable to shake the image of Derek Stone's cold smile. I didn't hear the car pull up, but I felt Ethan's presence before he even knocked. When I opened the door, he stood there in his tactical gear, his eyes sharp and calculating. Tell me everything, he said. I stepped aside, relief washing over me as I realized I wasn't alone in this. Ethan was here, and Derek Stone had no idea what was coming. Ethan didn't waste time. As soon as I finished explaining what had happened at the park, he pulled out a secure phone and began making calls. His calm demeanor was unnerving. I knew it meant he was already calculating, assessing, planning. While I watched him, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and unease. My brother was here, and that was a comfort. But seeing him like this, a man used to facing life-threatening situations, made the danger feel all too real. I need everything you can pull on the Iron Fangs, Ethan said into the phone. His voice clipped. Leadership, activities, connections. They've moved into Summit Grove, and they're targeting my sister. I sat on the couch, trying to still my trembling hands with a cup of tea. It didn't help. My mind replayed Derek Stone's words over and over. The thinly veiled threats against Emma and Jake. My children. I could handle a lot. But the thought of anyone hurting them was unbearable. Ethan hung up and turned to me, his face a mask of determination. They've been making waves across 3 states, he said. Vandalism, theft, extortion. But this, targeting individuals, this is new. It means they're getting bolder. Or desperate. I felt a lump in my throat. What do we do? You let me handle it, he said firmly. You focus on the kids. Grace. Keep them safe. Keep them calm. I'll deal with Derek Stone. The weight of his words settled over me. But I couldn't argue. Ethan had been trained for this kind of thing. I hadn't. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do more. That sitting on the sidelines wasn't enough. I've already started reaching out to people I trust. Ethan continued. We'll have eyes on your house. The school. Anywhere you go. Stone and his crew won't get within 100 yards without me knowing. What about the police? I asked. Shouldn't we report this? Ethan's jaw tightened. They're stretched thin. And from what I've heard, the Iron Fangs have people inside local law enforcement. Reporting it now might do more harm than good. It was hard to process. The idea that the people meant to protect us might be compromised. But I trusted Ethan. He wouldn't make a call like that lightly. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, life in Summit Grove carried on as if nothing had happened. The sun rose. Children walked to school. And neighbors chatted over coffee. But for me, everything felt different. Every sound, every shadow, every stranger seemed like a threat. Emma and Jake picked up on my tension, though I tried to hide it. Are the bad men gone? Mom? Emma asked as I packed their lunches. I forced a smile. Yes. Sweetie. Uncle Ethan is here now. He'll make sure everything's okay. Her face lit up at the mention of Ethan. My brother had always been her hero. The adventurous uncle with stories of far-off places and daring rescues. Jake, on the other hand, was quieter. His little brow furrowed as he watched me closely. He didn't ask any questions, but I could see the worry in his eyes. After dropping them off at school, I went home and found Ethan in the living room, staring at his laptop. Maps and files were spread out on the coffee table, and his phone buzzed intermittently with updates. He looked up as I entered, his expression softening for a moment before returning to its usual intensity. Derek Stone isn't just your average thug, he said. His ex-military, dishonorably discharged. His second-in-command, Logan Hayes, has a record a mile long. These guys aren't just about chaos, they're organized. And Summit Grove is their new target, I said, sinking onto the couch. Not just Summit Grove. Ethan replied. There's something here they want. Something bigger than just protection rackets. I've been digging into property records. And there's a pattern. They've been pushing people to sell in certain areas, businesses, homes, even parts of the park. Why? What's so important about this town? Ethan's expression darkened. I don't know yet. But it's enough for someone to use the Iron Fangs as muscle. Someone bigger is pulling the strings. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, then stood, grabbing his jacket. I have a meeting with Chief Garrett and Detective Sanders. Stay here. Grace. Lock the doors. I'll update you as soon as I can. I nodded. Watching him leave, the house felt quieter, emptier, without him there. But for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Ethan was on the case, and if anyone could figure this out, it was him. Still, as the day stretched on, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. I cleaned, organized, and distracted myself. But nothing could stop the gnawing anxiety in my chest. I wanted answers. Yes. But more than anything, I wanted this to be over. I wanted my children to feel safe again. By the time the sun began to set, I found myself pacing the living room, waiting for Ethan to return. Whatever he uncovered today, I knew it was just the beginning. The evening settled over Summit Grove, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. The kind of calm that normally felt comforting now felt suffocating, as if the town itself were holding its breath. I'd finally managed to get Emma and Jake ready for bed, though they were more restless than usual. Emma wanted to hear a story, something happy, and Jake insisted I check under his bed twice before he finally settled down. As I closed their bedroom door, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Ethan. His message brief, on my way back. Stay inside. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. Whatever he had discovered, I knew it wasn't good. He arrived 20 minutes later, his boots heavy on the porch. When I opened the door, his face was set in that unreadable expression he wore when things were serious. He stepped inside, checking the locks behind him before turning to me. What is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We've got bigger problems than the Iron Fangs, he said, setting a folder on the table. Derek Stone and his crew aren't the real threat here. They're just pawns. I sat down, my pulse quickening. Pawns for who? For something bigger, Ethan said, flipping through the folder. He pulled out a map of Summit Grove, marked with red circles. Look at this. These are the areas the Iron Fangs have been targeting: businesses, homes, parts of the park. They're not random. He paused, letting me absorb the information. The clusters on the map formed an almost perfect pattern, centered around the oldest parts of the town. Summit Grove sits on top of something. Ethan continued. Something buried. There's an underground structure, tied to a classified project from the 1940s, Project Nexus. The Iron Fangs are being used to create chaos, distract people, and push property owners out of key areas. I leaned back, my mind racing. What kind of structure? Ethan hesitated, his eyes meeting mine. We don't know exactly, but early government reports describe it as unnatural. The team that first discovered it in 1945 called it an artifact, something they believed wasn't made by humans. The air in the room seemed heavier, the gravity of his words settling between us. Are you saying this is alien? I'm saying it's old. Ethan replied. Old enough that it doesn't fit into anything we understand. And it's powerful. Whatever it is. The people using the Iron Fangs want it badly. I swallowed hard. My thoughts immediately going to Emma and Jake. Does it put us in danger? Ethan's expression softened for a moment, his brotherly concern slipping through. Not yet. But if they get their hands on it, that could change. He reached for his phone and showed me a series of grainy photos. They depicted dark tunnels, strange carvings in stone, and what looked like glowing symbols etched into metal. This is from a survey team that went down there in the 90s. They never completed their work. Everyone who went into the tunnels either vanished or came back with stories that didn't make sense. I shivered, pulling my cardigan tighter around me. And now they're digging again. Exactly. They're using the Iron Fangs to clear the way while their real operatives work in the shadows. A sudden noise outside made us both freeze. Ethan moved to the window, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. I followed him. My breath caught in my throat. A single motorcycle cruised slowly down our street, its headlight cutting through the darkness. The rider didn't stop. But they didn't need to. It was a message. They're watching. Ethan muttered, stepping back from the window. They want us scared. I exhaled shakily. Well, it's working. Ethan turned to me, his jaw tight. Listen, Grace, I'm going to stop this. But I need you to stay calm. For the kids. They're counting on us to protect them. I know, I said, my voice trembling. But it's so much bigger than us. Ethan, how do we fight something like this? He placed a steady hand on my shoulder. We fight smart. I've got people coming in, friends I trust. We're going to figure this out. But I need you to trust me. I nodded, though the fear still gnawed at me. Ethan's calm gave me strength. But the enormity of what we were facing felt insurmountable. Get some rest, Ethan said, moving back toward the kitchen. I'll keep watch tonight. Rest felt impossible. But I knew he was right. I needed to keep it together. For Emma and Jake. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the images Ethan had shown me. The strange carvings. The glowing symbols. The dark tunnels beneath our town. Summit Grove was no longer the quiet, safe place I had brought my children to. It was something else entirely. And the people who wanted it weren't going to stop until they had it. The next day dawned grey and overcast. A stark contrast to the golden autumn hues that usually defined Summit Grove. I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The tension in the house was palpable. Even with Ethan's steady presence. Emma and Jake were quiet at breakfast. Their usual chatter replaced by sidelong glances at me and whispers I couldn't quite catch. I knew they were scared. Even if I tried to hide my fear. Ethan had stayed up all night, sitting by the window with his laptop and phone. By the time the kids were ready for school, he had barely moved except to refill his coffee. They'll be safe at school, he assured me as I grabbed their backpacks. I've already got eyes on the building and the route. Derek Stone isn't stupid enough to make a move in broad daylight. His words should have been reassuring. But they weren't. The Iron Fangs had already proven they were willing to cross lines most people wouldn't. And what if they do? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Then I'll stop them. Ethan said simply, his calm tone a stark contrast to my fraying nerves. Trust me, Grace. I didn't respond. instead turning my focus to the kids. Come on. Emma. Jake. Let's get going. The walk to school felt longer than usual. Every noise, every passing car made me jump. I kept my head on a swivel, trying to appear casual for the kids. But my heart raced the entire time. When we reached the school gates, Emma looked up at me, her big brown eyes full of questions she wasn't ready to ask. Are the bad men going to come here? Mom, she asked, her voice soft. No, sweetie, I said, kneeling to her level. Uncle Ethan is making sure of that. You just focus on having a good day. Okay. She nodded slowly. But I could tell she wasn't convinced. Jake stayed quiet, holding my hand tightly until the teacher came to lead them inside. I watched them disappear into the school, my heart aching. They deserved to feel safe. And I hated that I couldn't promise them that right now. When I got back home, Ethan was waiting with a determined look on his face. We've got a lead, he said, gesturing for me to sit. Chief Garrett and Detective Sanders confirmed what I suspected. There's been unusual activity around the old industrial site on the edge of town. It's where the original excavation for Project Nexus happened. I frowned. But that place has been abandoned for years. Not anymore, Ethan said. Surveillance shows trucks going in and out late at night. Equipment being moved. And it's not just construction crews. We're talking about heavily armed teams, private contractors. I felt a chill run down my spine. You think they're digging for the artifact? I know they are, Ethan said. And they're close. Too close. That's why we need to act now. What do you mean by we? I asked, alarmed. Ethan leaned forward, his expression serious. This isn't just about me or my team anymore. This is your town, Grace. These are your neighbors, your friends. If we're going to stop them, the people of Summit Grove need to stand together. The idea of involving the townspeople felt overwhelming. These were ordinary people, shopkeepers, teachers, maintenance workers, not soldiers. They're not prepared for this, I said. They don't have to be soldiers, Ethan replied. They just need to be willing to fight for their home. And from what I've seen, Summit Grove is full of people who won't back down. He wasn't wrong. The people in this town had been through enough. They'd been threatened, intimidated, pushed to their limits. And yet, they stayed. They resisted. Maybe it was time to push back. Before I could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. We've got company, he said, moving to the window. I followed his gaze and saw 3 motorcycles parked just down the street. The riders weren't making a move, just sitting there, watching. A show of force. A reminder that they were still in control, or so they thought. What do we do? I asked, my voice shaking. We don't let them scare us, Ethan said firmly, and we don't let them think they've won. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Stay here, Grace. Lock the doors. Keep your phone close. I'll handle this. I watched him go, my stomach in knots. The motorcycles roared to life as he approached. But Ethan didn't flinch. He was calm, composed, completely in control. I couldn't hear what he said to them. But whatever it was, it worked. The riders revved their engines and sped off, disappearing down the road. When Ethan came back inside, he looked more determined than ever. It's time to show them who they're really dealing with, he said. And for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Ethan had a plan. And maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. That night, Summit Grove felt different. There was a buzz in the air. An energy that wasn't quite fear but wasn't hope either. It was the kind of tension that comes when people are pushed to their breaking point and decide they've had enough. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his laptop glowing as he mapped out the plan. Papers and notes were scattered everywhere, and his phone vibrated constantly with updates from his contacts. You're rallying the town, I said, watching him. It wasn't a question. He nodded. not looking up from his screen. We don't have a choice. If we wait for someone else to fix this, Summit Grove will be gone before anyone realizes what happened. His words hit hard. This was our home. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. The idea of losing it to people like Derek Stone or whoever was pulling his strings was unbearable. Still, the thought of asking people like Megan Carter or Ben Travis to stand against armed gangs and shadowy operatives felt impossible. Are you sure they'll fight? I asked. Most of them don't even know what's happening. They know enough. Ethan said. They know they're being pushed out, threatened, made to feel like their lives don't matter. People like that don't stay silent for long. He paused, his gaze meeting mine. And they've got you, Grace. You're one of them. If they see you standing up, they'll follow. His faith in me was humbling, but it also terrified me. I wasn't a leader. I was a teacher, a mother. What did I know about rallying a town to fight back? But as I thought about Emma and Jake, asleep upstairs, I realized it didn't matter. If standing up meant keeping them safe, I would do it. I had to. By morning, Ethan's plan was in motion. He started with Megan, who ran the hardware store on Main Street. She was a practical woman, always ready with a solution for a leaky pipe or a broken hinge. But when Ethan explained what was at stake, she didn't hesitate. They think they can scare us into giving up, she said, her voice firm. They don't know Summit Grove. From there, word spread quickly. Ben Travis, the park maintenance worker, rallied his crew, mapping out the town's infrastructure and finding ways to use it to our advantage. Farmers, shopkeepers, and parents came together, each offering what they could. Some brought tools, others knowledge, and a few even brought supplies left over from the days when Summit Grove prepared for natural disasters. The whole town began to hum with purpose. It was incredible to watch. People who had spent years living side by side but barely speaking were suddenly united. Fear was still there, but it wasn't paralyzing anymore. It had become something else, determination. Do you think it's enough? I asked Ethan as we stood in the center of the makeshift command post in Megan's store. The shelves were lined with hammers and flashlights, but the table in the middle was covered in maps and plans. Do you really think we can stand against them? It's not just about strength, Ethan said. It's about knowing what matters and refusing to let it go. Summit Grove isn't just a town. It's people who care about each other. That's not something Derek Stone or whoever he works for can understand. As the day wore on, I saw what he meant. Parents who had never spoken at PTA meetings now worked together to organize safe zones for the children. Farmers shared their knowledge of the land to create barriers and escape routes. Even the teenagers got involved, setting up communication networks with old radios and walkie-talkies. But it wasn't just about logistics. It was about the people. Megan joked with Ben about his ancient truck, and a young couple offered their barn as a staging area. Laughter mixed with worry, a fragile but beautiful reminder of what we were fighting for. By evening, the plan was set. The town would hold the Iron Fangs at bay while Ethan and his team focused on the industrial site. Whatever was buried beneath Summit Grove, it was clear the artifact was the key to everything. Ethan believed it wasn't just about control, it was about survival. If the wrong people got their hands on it, the consequences would ripple far beyond our town. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the streets, I found myself standing in front of the small group of townspeople gathered in Megan's store. Their faces were a mix of determination and doubt. But all of them were here because they believed in something bigger than themselves. We're not soldiers, I began, my voice trembling at first. But we are Summit Grove. This is our home. And no one gets to take it from us. Not the Iron Fangs. Not anyone. The room was silent for a moment. Then Megan stepped forward, nodding. We've got this. The others echoed her sentiment. And for the first time in days, I felt something close to hope. We didn't know what the night would bring. But we knew one thing for sure, We weren't going down without a fight. The night descended over Summit Grove with an unsettling stillness. The kind of quiet that made you feel like the whole world was holding its breath. Megan's hardware store had become our unofficial command center, and it buzzed with nervous energy as people finalized preparations. Maps of the town were pinned to the walls, and Ethan's voice carried over the hum of conversation as he gave instructions to the small teams we'd formed. I stood near the back, trying to steady my nerves. Every so often, my eyes would dart to my phone, checking for updates from the school where Emma and Jake were staying under watch. I knew they were safe, but my heart ached not having them close. I wondered if they'd ever forgive me for bringing them to this town, thinking it would be a refuge. Ethan approached, his expression focused but gentle. "You're doing great, Grace." I laughed softly, the sound shaky and hollow. "I'm just trying to keep from falling apart." "Trust me," he said, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You're stronger than you think. And you're not alone." His words carried more weight than he realized. Looking around the room, I saw faces that were usually familiar in the most mundane ways, people I waved to at the grocery store, neighbors I only exchanged small talk with. Now they were united, standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to fight for something bigger than themselves. Megan stepped forward, holding a bundle of flashlights and radios. "All right, people. Let's make this count. No one gets left behind. And no one fights alone. If you see something, report it. If you need help, call for it. We've got this." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and I felt a small flicker of hope. It wasn't just words. It was the kind of hope that comes from knowing you've done everything you can. And whatever happens next, you won't face it alone. Ethan clapped his hands, drawing everyone's attention. "Listen up. The Iron Fangs are going to make their move tonight. We've already spotted some of their scouts near the industrial site. And our goal is to keep them contained. Ben's crew has set up barriers on the eastern side of town to slow them down. And Megan's group will secure the main road leading into Summit Grove." "What about you?" Ben asked, his arms crossed. "I'm going into the industrial site," Ethan said. "That's where they're digging. And that's where the artifact is. If we can disrupt their operation there, we'll cut them off at the source." The room fell silent. Everyone knew the industrial site was dangerous, crawling with mercenaries and whatever strange forces the artifact was awakening. But Ethan spoke with such conviction. It was hard to doubt him. "You'll need backup," Ben said finally. "I'm coming with you." "So am I," Megan added. Ethan hesitated, clearly weighing the risks. But then he nodded. "Fine. But you follow my lead. This isn't just about brute force, it's about precision." I wanted to protest, to tell Ethan that going into the heart of the operation was too dangerous. But I knew better. He wouldn't back down. And if I tried to stop him, I'd only distract him. Instead, I reached out and grabbed his hand. "Be careful." "I will," he promised. "And you stay here, Grace. Keep everyone focused." I nodded, though my chest tightened at the thought of him walking into danger. But I trusted him. If anyone could pull this off, it was Ethan. As the teams dispersed to their positions, the air grew colder, the stillness heavier. I stayed at the command post with a handful of others, monitoring the radios and preparing for whatever came next. The tension was suffocating, and every crackle of static made me jump. Then the first report came through. "This is Ben," his voice came over the radio. Low but steady. "We've got movement near the eastern perimeter. Looks like 3 bikes. Maybe 4. Megan's voice followed a second later. "Main road's clear for now. But we're hearing engines in the distance." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. Ethan's team was silent, already en route to the industrial site. I tried to focus on the reports coming in, but my mind kept wandering to him, to the dangers he was walking into. The next voice on the radio was Logan Reaper Hayes. "This is your last chance. Summit Grove, he growled, his voice crackling with menace. You think you can stop us? You think you can fight back? We'll tear this town apart. Megan snatched the radio. Come and try. Reaper. We're not going anywhere. Her defiance sent a surge of courage through the room. But my hands still shook. The battle was starting. And all we could do now was hold the line. As the first echoes of gunfire reached us, I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer. For Ethan. For Summit Grove. For all of us. The sound of distant gunfire hung in the air, a sharp contrast to the usual quiet of Summit Grove. In Megan's hardware store, we clustered around the radios, every crackle and voice a lifeline to those on the front lines. My heart raced as I listened, waiting for updates that seemed to come too slowly. Eastern barrier holding. Ben's voice crackled through. They're testing us. But we're holding. Relief washed over me for a moment. But it was fleeting. I knew this was only the beginning. Ethan's team had gone silent since heading toward the industrial site. And every second of that silence felt like an eternity. Megan glanced at me from across the table, her usually calm demeanor faltering for a moment. He'll be okay. Grace, she said softly. Ethan knows what he's doing. I know. I replied, though my voice was unsteady. But that doesn't make it easier. The room fell quiet again, save for the hum of the radios. I could see the tension on everyone's faces. The weight of what we were all trying to do. These weren't soldiers, they were parents, shopkeepers, maintenance workers, ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. And yet, they stood their ground. Another voice broke the silence. This one grim and clipped. They're pushing harder on the main road. Megan's team reported. We're holding for now. But we need reinforcement. Megan grabbed her radio. Ben. Can you spare anyone? Negative, came Ben's reply. They've got more bikes circling here. We're stretched thin. I could feel the fear in the room growing. The iron fangs were relentless. And despite our preparations, we were barely holding them back. Megan turned to me, her jaw tight. I'll head out. They'll need me on the main road. I reached for her hand. Be careful. She nodded, her usual resolve returning. You too. Stay strong. Grace. As she left, I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. With Megan gone, I was the one holding this fragile group together. I had to stay calm, even as my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. The radios crackled sporadically, reports of movement and skirmishes coming in waves. But still, no word from Ethan. Then, finally, a voice broke through the static. This is Ethan, he said, his tone low but steady. We're inside the industrial site. It's worse than we thought. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. What do you mean? They're close to breaking through, he said. The artifact, it's not just some relic. It's active. It's influencing everything around it. His words sent a chill through me. What does that mean for us? It means we're running out of time. Ethan replied. The Iron Fangs are just a distraction. The real threat is coming from the ones pulling their strings. Black SUVs. Tactical teams. These people are professionals. Grace. They're not just here for the artifact, they're here to control it. A voice in the background caught my attention. Ben's. Ethan. We've got company. They're on to us. The radio went silent for a moment. Then Ethan's voice returned. Sharp and urgent. Grace. Listen to me. You need to keep everyone focused. The town depends on it. Ethan. Wait. I said. Panic rising in my chest. What about you? I'll handle it, he said firmly. Just keep the line intact. The radio cut off again, and I was left staring at the device in my hands. My thoughts spinning. Ethan was walking into something far worse than we'd imagined. And there was nothing I could do to help him. The sound of heavy engines outside snapped me back to reality. I ran to the window and saw a group of motorcycles roaring down Main Street. They weren't stopping, they were headed straight for Megan's group on the main road. I grabbed the radio. "Megan. They're coming your way. Be ready." Her response crackled through. "Copy that. We're ready for them." The determination in her voice steadied me, even as fear gnawed at the edges of my mind. This wasn't just about holding the town anymore. It was about survival. As I turned back to the room, I caught a glimpse of the map on the table. The industrial site was circled in red, its ominous presence looming over everything. Whatever was happening there, it was at the heart of all this chaos. And Ethan was right in the middle of it. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. The people in this room, the people in this town, they were counting on me to keep it together. No matter what happened next, I had to believe that we could hold on, that Ethan would find a way to stop this. The sounds of gunfire echoed faintly in the distance, a grim reminder of the battle unfolding all around us. I closed my eyes for a moment, whispering a silent prayer. "Come back to us, Ethan," I murmured. "We need you." And with that, I turned back to the radios, ready to do whatever it took to protect Summit Grove. The tension in Megan's hardware store was suffocating as we monitored the radios. Every distant sound of gunfire, every crackle of static was a reminder of how close we were to the edge. The faint thrum of motorcycles still echoed from the outskirts of town, and I could feel the weight of every decision bearing down on me. Ethan's voice had gone silent again, and the unknown was worse than any report of danger. "They're pushing harder," came a voice over the radio. It was Ben. "Another group's coming from the eastern woods. Looks like they're trying to flank us." My stomach dropped. I leaned toward the map on the table, tracing the path of the woods with my finger. If the Iron Fangs got through there, they'd cut directly into the heart of the town, and our defenses wouldn't hold. "Can you hold them?" I asked over the radio, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll try," Ben replied, but I could hear the strain in his voice. "Tell Megan to watch her back, this isn't just a test run anymore." I grabbed Megan's frequency and relayed the message, praying that she'd hold her line. She didn't respond right away, which sent a fresh wave of dread through me. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours before her voice finally broke through. "Got it. We'll hold the main road," Megan said. "Just keep an eye on the rest of the town." I let out a shaky breath and turned to the others in the room. "We need to send someone to the eastern woods. If they break through there." A man stepped forward, Marcus, a retired construction worker who had been quiet until now. "I'll go," he said. "I know those woods better than most. I can guide a team." "Are you sure?" I asked. He didn't have the hardened look of some of the others, but his voice was steady, his determination clear. "Positive," Marcus said. "Just give me a couple of people, and we'll make sure they don't get through." I nodded, quickly assembling a small group to join him. As they left, the air in the room felt even thinner. Every decision was a gamble, every move critical. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something far bigger than we understood. And then, finally, Ethan's voice crackled through the radio again. "We've reached the dig site," he said, his tone grim. "It's worse than we thought." "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the radio tightly. "They're pulling the artifact out," Ethan replied. "It's not just some relic, Grace. It's alive. It's affecting everything around it, distorting reality." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What do you mean? Alive?" "It's hard to explain," Ethan said. "It's like it's aware. The people working on it, they're not in control anymore. Whatever this thing is, it's driving them." "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm working on that," he said. "But Grace, this is bigger than Summit Grove. If they activate this thing, it won't just affect the town. It'll ripple out. We're talking about something on a scale we can't even imagine." The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. The lives of everyone in Summit Grove and beyond were at stake. And Ethan was at the center of it, trying to stop something none of us could fully comprehend. "I need you to hold the line," Ethan continued. "Keep the town together. I'll do what I can here." His voice cut out again, leaving me staring at the radio in silence. The others in the room watched me, their faces a mix of fear and determination. They were waiting for me to tell them what to do. "Okay," I said, standing straighter. "We hold. No matter what. We hold." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Reports came in from all over town: skirmishes, barriers holding, pushes from the iron fangs that we barely managed to repel. But through it all, the people of Summit Grove stood their ground. Parents, shopkeepers, and farmers, all of them were fighting for something they refused to lose. But then the tone of the radios changed. "This is Ben," his voice crackled through. Breathless. "We've got a problem. A big one." "What is it?" I asked, dread creeping into my voice. "They've brought reinforcements," Ben said. "Not just bikes. Trucks. Heavily armed." The room went silent as his words sank in. Trucks meant more men. More firepower, more than we were equipped to handle. "Hold your position," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll figure something out." I looked at the map again, my mind racing. We had no way to counter the kind of reinforcements they were bringing. Our best hope was Ethan. And he was still at the dig site, facing something far worse than the iron fangs. As the sounds of engines grew louder in the distance, I whispered a silent prayer. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. But we weren't giving up. Not yet. The roar of engines grew louder, an ominous drumbeat echoing through the streets of Summit Grove. Inside Megan's hardware store, the tension was electric. Every face around me reflected the same emotions: fear, determination, and the grim acceptance of what was coming. The trucks Ben had warned us about were close now, their lights cutting through the night as they rolled toward the edges of town. "They're bringing the fight to us," one of the volunteers muttered, gripping a crowbar like it was his lifeline. "Let them come," another said, though her voice trembled. "This is our home. We're not running." I stood near the center of the room, staring at the radio. Ethan's last message played on a loop in my mind: "Hold the line." But how could we hold against this? Trucks meant more men, more weapons, things we didn't have. Ben's voice crackled through the static. "They're moving fast. Heading straight for the main road." "Megan's team?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "They're digging in," Ben replied. "But they're outnumbered. If these trucks hit them full force, it's over." I clenched my fists, the helplessness suffocating. Ethan was still at the dig site, trying to stop something none of us understood, while we faced the very real threat of the iron fangs overrunning the town. "We need to divert them," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If they hit the main road, we'll lose our defenses. Can we force them to split up?" Ben hesitated. "Maybe. But it's a risk." "We don't have a choice," I said. "I'll send a team to create a diversion near the eastern woods. If we can draw some of them away, Megan's group might stand a chance." Marcus's group was already in the eastern woods, but they were spread thin. I grabbed the radio and switched to his channel. "Marcus, I need you to make some noise. Draw their attention. Can you do it?" His reply was calm. "Despite the urgency, we'll do what we can. Just make sure someone's got our backs." "Always," I said, though I wasn't sure how true it was. As I set the plan in motion, I glanced at the map again, my thoughts drifting to Ethan. He'd gone quiet again, and every second of silence felt heavier than the last. My brother was out there, facing something that defied explanation, and I couldn't do anything to help him. The radio crackled, pulling me back to the moment. "This is Megan," her voice tense but steady. "We've got eyes on the trucks. Looks like they're slowing down, probably trying to figure out their next move. Hold tight." I told her. Marcus is creating a diversion. We just need to buy time. Time. It was the one thing we didn't have enough of. Meanwhile, at the dig site, Ethan moved through the shadows like a ghost. The industrial complex was crawling with mercenaries. Their movements precise and methodical. He could feel the weight of the artifact's presence. Even from a distance. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with an energy that made his skin prickle. "Ben's right," he muttered into his radio. Speaking to his small team. "This thing is active. We need to stop it before they get it out." "How do we even stop something like this?" one of his men asked. Ethan didn't have an answer. The artifact wasn't just an object, it was alive. Aware. And it was influencing everyone around it. Even the mercenaries seemed uneasy. Their actions sharper and more aggressive. As if they were fighting an invisible force. As Ethan crept closer to the central chamber, he saw it, a massive object pulsing with light. Its surface etched with glowing symbols that seemed to shift and writhe. The containment equipment surrounding it was barely holding. The metal groaning under the strain. "We don't have much time," Ethan said. "If they move this thing, we're all in trouble." Back in town, the battle was escalating. The diversion in the eastern woods had worked, some of the trucks had veered off, splitting their forces. But Megan's group was still taking the brunt of the assault. Gunfire echoed through the streets. Each shot a reminder of how close we were to losing everything. "This is Marcus," his voice broke through the radio. "We've got them chasing us. But they're faster than we expected. We can't hold them off for long." I gripped the radio tighter. My mind racing. We needed to hold. Ethan needed more time. "Do what you can," I said. My voice trembling. "Just keep them moving." The people around me were working frantically, monitoring the radios, reinforcing the barricades, and tending to those already injured. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of unity, a shared understanding that no matter what happened, we were in this together. "Ethan," I whispered to myself, "please hurry." The night stretched on, every second a battle of its own. And through it all, one thought kept repeating in my mind: we couldn't let them win. Not here. Not in Summit Grove. The battle for Summit Grove surged into the darkest hours of the night. The town seemed alive with noise, the roar of engines, the pop of gunfire, the shouts of people giving everything they had to hold the line. The radio on the table in Megan's hardware store crackled constantly, updates coming in from every corner of town. Each report was another thread in a web of chaos. But we held on. "Megan here," her voice cut through the static. "They've broken through the first barrier. But we've slowed them down. What's happening on your end?" I gripped the radio tightly, trying to sound calm. "Marcus is keeping their reinforcements busy in the woods. But he won't hold them forever. Can you hold your position?" "Not sure," she admitted. "But we're not backing down." The weight of her words settled over me. No one in Summit Grove was backing down. Not tonight. Even though we were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting a battle we'd never asked for. The people of this town were giving everything to protect it. And that gave me hope, fragile, but real. "Grace." Ben's voice broke in, urgent and strained. "We've got movement near the southern barrier. Looks like they're testing us there now." "Two. Southern barrier?" My stomach dropped. That wasn't just a weak spot, it was dangerously close to the school where Emma and Jake were sheltering. If the Iron Fangs made it through there, "I'm on it," I said. Standing quickly, I grabbed the radio again. "Ben, send someone to back them up." "I'm heading there now." One of the volunteers in the store looked at me, wide-eyed. "You're going out there?" "They're near the school," I said firmly. "I'm not staying here." The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded, grabbing his jacket. "Then I'm coming with you." We moved quickly through the dark streets, the sounds of the battle growing louder as we neared the southern barrier. My heart pounded, both from fear and from the urgency of the moment. I couldn't let anything happen to Emma and Jake. Not after everything we'd fought for. When we reached the barrier, we found a small group of townspeople bracing themselves for the inevitable. They had improvised weapons, baseball bats, garden tools, anything they could find, and their faces were a mix of determination and fear. "They're close," one of them said, pointing toward the woods. "We saw their lights." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. "We hold here. No matter what." The words felt hollow, but they were all I had to offer. The truth was, I didn't know how we were going to stop them. All I could do was stand with the people of Summit Grove and hope it would be enough. Then, the lights appeared, headlights cutting through the trees. The roar of engines growing louder. The iron fangs were coming. "Positions," someone shouted. And we moved quickly, taking cover behind whatever we could. My hands shook as I gripped a heavy flashlight, knowing it wouldn't do much against the weapons these men carried. But I refused to let fear paralyze me. The first motorcycle burst through the trees, its rider sneering as he revved the engine. Behind him came another, then another. The trucks weren't far behind, their size and noise making them even more menacing. But the people of Summit Grove didn't falter. A man next to me hurled a heavy branch into the lead rider's path, sending the motorcycle skidding off course. Another group rolled a barricade into place, forcing the trucks to swerve. It wasn't enough to stop them completely, but it slowed them down, buying us precious time. "Ethan, where are you?" I whispered under my breath, the question more a prayer than anything else. At the dig site. Ethan's team was in the middle of their own battle. The artifact pulsed with an unnatural light, its energy distorting everything around it. The mercenaries guarding it were no longer in control. Whatever force the artifact wielded had taken hold, driving them into a frenzy. Ethan crouched behind a steel beam, his heart racing as he surveyed the scene. "We need to disrupt the containment field," he said into his radio. "If we can't stop the artifact, we at least have to weaken it." One of his men replied, his voice strained. "We've planted charges, but we need more time. Then we'll buy it," Ethan said, stepping out of cover. He moved quickly, drawing fire as he closed the distance to the artifact. The air around it felt alive, heavy with a presence that made his skin crawl. But he didn't stop. The artifact glowed brighter as Ethan approached, its surface writhing with symbols that seemed to shift and change with every second. He could feel its awareness now, a deep, probing sensation that was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. "Grace," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "Hold on. Just a little longer." Back in town, the battle at the southern barrier raged on. The iron fangs pressed forward, relentless. But the people of Summit Grove didn't break. I fought alongside them, my fear eclipsed by a fierce determination. We weren't just fighting for the town, we were fighting for each other, for everything that mattered. And as the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon, I knew one thing for certain: we weren't giving up. Not now. Not ever. As the first light of dawn washed over Summit Grove, the battle was over. The iron fangs had been driven out, their forces shattered by the unyielding resolve of the townspeople. Ethan and his team had succeeded at the dig site, destabilizing the artifact's containment field just enough to neutralize its influence without unleashing its unknown power. The town stood together, bruised but unbroken, its people bound by the shared experience of defending their home. Megan, Ben, Marcus, and so many others had proven that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's standing firm despite it. Ethan returned that morning, exhausted but alive, his face etched with relief as he embraced me and the kids. "We did it," he said, though his eyes betrayed the weight of what had been at stake. Summit Grove wasn't the same after that night. The scars remained, but so did the lessons: unity, resilience, and the power of community. We learned that even in the darkest moments, light can prevail if we stand together. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more tales of courage, resilience, and the triumph of the human spirit. See you next time.